called Denise Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite keen to talk on Schedule 2, Part 2 of the bill because of its association with the provisions in the local government, the Local Electoral Act, and also the Local Government Auckland Council Act of 2009, which I was very familiar with at the time. Mr. Chair, I'm one of the survivors of the super city in Auckland. In 2009, in my role as the City Councillor, Auckland City Councillor, representing the ward of the Hauraki Gulf, we waged a very, very ferocious campaign against the government's desire to collapse our local democracy and introduce local boards. We did this because we didn't believe that local boards would actually give us the sort of local democracy that we wanted. And in fact, what we wanted was more decision-making, not less. Originally, the smaller communities of the Gulf, Great Barrier and Waiheke, were not going to have any representation of their own at all. They would have been collapsed into our local board based in central Auckland. And after 4 years of this amalgamation, this model that this government wants to roll out to the rest of the country, I have to say that the local board model has not developed more powers for communities. Without a doubt, those who are elected to local board positions do so with the best intentions to represent their communities and to have the ability to advocate on behalf of their communities at the governing body level, but they don't have access to the funds. And I agree with the previous speaker around the powers that were stripped from councils through the legislation, which is still in this legislation, which was when the council introduced when the government, the national government, introduced council-controlled organisations. And how that's played out in Auckland is that local boards struggle. They absolutely struggle to be heard by these unaccountable and corporate organisations that control more than half of the entire council's assets. Auckland Transport, for example, are very difficult to deal with. A resident of Waiheke quite recently wrote to them to complain about the fact that when they had done maintenance on a road, Seaview Road on Waiheke Island, which has no footpaths, they had made it less safer for walkers, they'd made it less safer for cyclists, and they'd made it less safe for horse riders. And this person, his name's Michael Tavares, he asked Auckland Transport what he should do if he is faced with a car that has sped up as a result of their maintenance, which was actually a redesign of the entire road. The letter he got back said that basically he should jump in the ditch because that would be his only alternative. Now, our local board has been trying really hard to work with Auckland Transport on some design specifications that would fit with our particular community, because that's what a local board does. It advocates. And we have had, our local board representatives have had no and very little response from Auckland Transport because it's not accountable. That's not run by elected representatives. And so we're faced with ridiculous comments from our Auckland Transport people saying, go jump in a ditch. And that kind of sums it up. That is how local government will play out once you remove the decision-making powers of local boards and of local councillors from local democracy. It's very, very disturbing to see that this government wants to roll out more amalgamations across the country because it does diminish democracy. And when we are paying rates, then surely we should have a say in what kind of representation we should have. Because I believe, and I'm sure most of the people in this House believe, that we shouldn't have taxation with no representation. But this is what can happen, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Thank you. This is what can certainly happen when you roll out the local board model and you force amalgamations. What happens is that there are fewer locally elected and accountable representatives. There is less control of the assets, and there is a weakening of the powers that local representatives have in their communities. Mr. Chair, we have to question why it is the government's agenda to roll out amalgamations across the country, and could it be that they are wanting to force the corporatisation but also the privatisation of council property and council assets? In Auckland, one of the council-controlled organisations that we have that came about as a result of the forced amalgamation is Auckland Investments Limited. Now, they control most of the properties and the major properties around Auckland that the council owns, including the ports of Auckland. And we've seen time after time elected representatives attempting to get information from the ports of Auckland, from Auckland Investment Limited, about what sort of costs they have had to bear in a fairly nasty and unpleasant industrial relations dispute that's been carrying on for the last couple of years. Now, the ability of local representatives to get that information about how much it's costing ratepayers of Auckland for a very unpleasant industrial dispute has not been forthcoming, and the elected representatives has very little power to be able to take on any kind of scrutiny of the accounts because they're just simply not presented. The only way councillors in Auckland can administer any kind of scrutiny of the ports of Auckland is through the Auckland Investment Limited's statement of intent, where they get to ask questions of their chief executive there every 3 to 6 months. Now, that's outrageous. These are assets that are owned by the people of Auckland, and yet they have no say and no control over them, and certainly there's very little accountability. Mr. Chair, local boards are not a panacea. They are not a way of increasing democracy. They are a way of decreasing powers for communities. And we have some very good, competent councils throughout New Zealand, and to collapse them into local boards and governing bodies is to continue the mistake that was made with Auckland. Because we could be so much better in Auckland. We could have so much more democracy there. We could have a far more engaged people taking interest in what our council does if we could have more transparency and accountability. But to force amalgamations on other centres is unacceptable. It is anti-democratic, and it's not something that I think this government should be rolling out throughout New Zealand.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a principle in democracy which says that you don't have taxation without representation. And that phrase comes to mind in this situation where this